Now I'm also recording.
Okay. So what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is let's start over.
Okay.
Okay. And then we'll just go from there. All right. Hi, I'm Allie, and I'm Living Chronic Faith. Thanks for stopping by. Today, I'm so excited to share with you a guest who is a sweet friend of mine named Sydney Montgomery, and she's going to share with us about the kind of work-life balance that many of us deal with as we're living with and managing a chronic condition. So welcome, Sydney. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about it.
Absolutely. If you would like to start off just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, my name is Sydney. I'm from Maryland. I'm 27. I am the founder and CEO of S. Montgomery Admissions Consulting. So, I provide personalized 9th through 12th grade college counseling and also law school admissions advice. I work primarily with first generation and minority applicants, although I do see other students as well. But my main focus is really to help students break down generational barriers to higher education and start to create and build generational wealth. So 56% of my students get at least a half tuition scholarship to law school. 78% of my students have gone to a top 30 law school. And, I've worked with since I started in 2012, well over 100 students. But for me, it's really about the platform that I'm building and the voice that I'm giving. I also am on the board of advisors to the Institute for Anti-Racist Education, and I am co-founder of College Equity First, which produced the College Equity Index in 2021, which ranked 105 of the top private colleges in this country on access affordability, diversity, campus culture, and also outcomes for the Black students on their campus.
That's incredible. You are doing incredible work in the community and just for so many young people, giving them the jump start that they need in life. That's awesome.
Thank
And
you.
sounds like you stay very, very busy as well.
I do stay busy, really busy, too busy,
That's
probably.
awesome. So tell me, with all that you do, tell me how chronic illness plays into that, into your schedule and into your daily life.
Yeah. So, my story is definitely a little, I guess maybe it is traditional. I was a dancer growing up and a gymnast, although I wasn't actually very good at either. Decent, but not professional level. I had a herniated disc in my back from
Mm,
gymnastics that I was dealing with my freshman year of college. That resolved. But then my senior year, I was at home for winter break and I went to get something out of my backpack. I'd been having some kind of heat sensation, some nerve pain before then, but nothing that they could really find. I went to get something out of my backpack and I couldn't stand up.
oh my.
So yeah, I just my back totally spasmed. And that was like December 27th, 2014, have the date. Because from then it just became this issue of like this dance injury that they couldn't really figure
Mhm.
out. They thought it was a disc issue. They let me keep dancing. I danced through all that pain. I was doing acupuncture. I just kind of
Wow.
pushed through it. Then they sent me to all these specialists in the Princeton area who couldn't figure out what was wrong because my MRI was normal.
Hmm.
So they did all these, steroid injections, and they were like, okay, well, when you go to Harvard, because I went from Princeton to Harvard Law, they were like, when you go to Harvard, we have a doctor there, Dr. Lauren Elson, who's fantastic. She's head of the dance medicine program.
Wow.
When you go there, see her. Of course, she had a wait list. So I
Right.
got to Boston. I'm a 1L, and they had given me a bunch of codeine. So I'm like, taking Tylenol with codeine basically every day. I start some PT. I end up getting in to see Dr. Demacor at Boston Children's, who diagnoses me with all this hemipelvic tilt, SI joint
Wow.
dysfunction, all this stuff. So I'm working with Dr. Elson. I'm working with my PT. They did another round of injections, which went really horribly, and I like couldn't really walk. So I took my first semester exams like from my bed basically, and I was using my Swiffer as a like
Oh my
cane because
goodness.
they didn't give me like crutches. And I had friends who were like printing out outlines for me. It was definitely, there was a lot going on my first year, just trying to figure
Mhm.
out what was going on. And to be honest, um even when they kind of sort of got a diagnosis, my pain would be really migratory. So for probably all of my 3 years at Harvard, I went to the PT twice a week at least. At one point, I was traveling to Wellesley for gyrotonics. I was traveling to Waltham for pelvic floor PT. I was seeing a chiropractor once a week. I was seeing Dr. Elson. I was seeing all these people. And I was being in Ubers like all the time. My section leader told me that there were funds actually um, available. So Harvard did reimburse my medical costs because I was also doing massages once a month. And
Mm,
I was just trying to do basically everything that I could, but I was in, a lot of pain, but I was
absolutely.
also in school. So, I was just kind of like, okay, we'll just figure it out. They took me off of like everything. They were like, no dancing, no exercising,
Right.
no nothing. Because they couldn't figure out what would make it worse or what would make it better. Um, my second year,
Mhm.
or I think maybe the end of my first year, I also started having like really debilitating fatigue.
Mm,
And they were like, oh, law school is stressful. You're probably just
mhm.
tired. And I was like, I really don't know. I had some sleep studies done and that came back normal. So I was like, okay. So I saw an integrative medicine doctor, and she prescribed me a bunch of things. And I went home for the summer, right? And I came home and I worked at Maryland Legal Aid and I, was very active. But my parents had to help me. They had to drive me to and from my internship
Mhm.
because I was just really tired and I was in a lot of pain. And they couldn't quite figure out. I ended up seeing an infectious disease doctor at Mass Gen who was like, oh, you previously had Lyme. So she gave me some antibiotics for that, but that didn't really seem to help anything. So I'm kind of always like juggling these two things. And, I ended up getting to the place where I could dance and I did dance. I co-choreographed the law school parody my third year, but I also like sometimes took Percocet like when I had pain flares, and it would be kind of like I was good one day and then I would get up from a chair and then I'd have this pain that lasted for 2 months.
Yeah.
Right? It would just be like just like that, like, oh, I can't walk right now. Um and I am like shuffling myself to like student health, trying not to like make a scene so that no one's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, oh, I'm fine,
Mhm.
just gonna go there and figure that out real quick. But I'll be back for class. I was really just trying to not let my health keep me from any opportunities and any like social events. Like I didn't want to miss anything. And
Right.
they also couldn't figure out what was going on. So I graduated. Well, actually,
Incredible.
I was misdiagnosed with narcolepsy my third year of law school,
Oh,
which was like incorrect, but also was a whole thing because then I'm like telling my friends, oh, I'm tired because I have narcolepsy and also I have this random pain everywhere that they can't figure out. But I graduated from law school and I clerked for a judge on the Montgomery County Circuit Court. And I started having way more symptoms, I think, because I had
mhm.
fashioned my schedule in law school such that I stacked my classes. So I had classes like two, maybe 2.5 days a week, but I had a lot of space. One to go to doctor's appointments and, also to sleep in till 9. And I did a lot to move my schedule around. And I didn't actually realize I had done that in college as well. But it just was second nature to me. It was like, oh, I just like having space. But
Mhm.
when I started clerking, I mean, that's 8:30 to 6 every day, right?
Every
You're in
day.
before your judge, you're out after your judge. And I started developing rashes, I started developing nerve pain,
Mhm.
I started developing all these things that finally someone was like, you need to go see a rheumatologist, who at first did diagnose me with lupus.
Mhm.
And that's sort of been walked back a little bit. But so we were kind of dealing with that. And then I had been consulting, but I knew that I needed to go somewhere that had good health care. I didn't end up actually doing that, but I went to a small family law firm because I was really concerned about finding a place that was going to be okay with my health challenges. And it was a
Mhm.
firm of all women and mostly moms. So I was like, okay, great, they'll understand.
Right.
Um, and it was really a challenge, right? And not to say that they weren't understanding, but the law firm life was such that I wasn't hitting my billables. My health really deteriorated.
Mm.
I ended up, having to go to Hopkins for the nerve pain. I'm getting diagnosed with small fiber neuropathy. I was having all these hives. I was still having lots of pain. I was like sitting on the floor of the law firm because like I couldn't sit in my chair. There was just like so much that was happening that and then I wasn't hitting my billable hours, right? So I was really struggling. As it turns out, I actually have also ADHD, which was undiagnosed at the time. So I just wasn't it wasn't working, and I ended up getting a performance review, a negative performance improvement plan, I guess. And I've never like failed like at a work
Mhm.
or school thing. And I was just feeling so trapped because it was just taking everything in me to get to work,
Yeah.
which was like an hour commute to do all of the work, to be
Wow.
present. And then I was coming home and then I was consulting with my own business. And then, it was just so much that I talked to my doctors and they were like, you actually have to you have to work part time. Like you can't work full time. And I wasn't able to get part-time work at the
Mhm.
firm. So I ended up taking a medical leave right before COVID because I mean it was definitely hard to hear your doctor say like you really can't work full time right now, at least not like
Mhm.
that. Um and to try to navigate that and I got all these doctor's notes and all these things and it wasn't able to get the accommodations that I needed. I think that God really just had other plans.
Yeah.
And I had been looking for actually other jobs. I was like, okay, well, maybe I can't work at a firm right now. Maybe I'll teach, right? I have a Princeton and a Harvard law degree. Someone in this county, some private school must hire me. I got no interviews. Like not a single one. They probably, I don't know what they thought. But I was like, "Okay, God really doesn't want me doing that either."
Mhm.
Cool, cool. So I I was 26, I didn't have any savings, I had debt, and I, like, helped my sister out financially. She's 16, so I pay for a lot of, like, her ACT and SAT prep and tutors and that
Mhm.
kinda stuff. And, I was like, "Okay, well, let me write up this little." I, like, wrote up a plan for my parents, it's, like, 5 pages. This is how I'm gonna support myself. This is how many students I need to get, like all these things because I took that medical leave and I knew I wasn't coming back. And I think they probably knew I wasn't coming back. And then COVID happened. Um,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, okay. I like took out a personal loan just to like make me feel like I had some cushion. And I
Mhm.
did go on unemployment. But God really blessed me in the pandemic such that I was actually able to make 6 figures in my business that year.
Mhm.
Um, but still dealing with, a lot of my health struggles. I was still
Mhm.
having new symptoms. I was still trying to figure out what was going on. I actually just recently, I guess a couple months ago, saw a specialist in New York who ended up diagnosing me correctly with a hypermobile spectrum disorder. It's a like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a connective tissue disease, and some slight immunodeficiencies. So they were able to kind of, I feel like we're in a place where they're getting more to the core of what's going on. I
Yeah.
won't say that they fully figured everything out, but then, the treatments are like, I'm having hip surgery next month. And we're like going to a neurosurgery consult at the end of the summer. And so, there's still a lot of things that I'm balancing and juggling for sure. But it's been easier to balance. I mean, still very hard, but easier to balance now that I, am my own boss sort of thing.
And that is definitely one of the takeaways that I got from what you were sharing. Wow, that's such a relatable story, I think, and for myself and probably for others who are watching, that the diagnosis process is one of the hardest processes that you go through when you're dealing with a chronic illness. In that process, you mentioned that you were sitting on the floor at the law firm. You discovered that you were ADHD, which had been previously undiagnosed. All of these things, trying to shuffle along and put on a brave face so that others didn't recognize. What was that like, trying to explain or trying to navigate that, you know whether it was having to let people know what was going on or trying to keep them from knowing what was going on? What was that like, and how did that affect you emotionally and mentally?
I think it was easier to explain, even though the diagnoses are definitely still shifting a little bit. I
Mhm.
think it was once I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, which, of course, became a connective tissue disease instead.
Mhm.
But once I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, it became a little bit easier. because I could tell people, I have an autoimmune disease. I also have fibromyalgia, and it causes chronic pain and fatigue. And so I'm going to need medical accommodations. I think it was a lot harder when I just had a dance injury. Like, I got accommodations for the bar exam because I couldn't sit for a very long time. So I
Mhm.
had to have a standing desk, and I got accommodations for my exams at Harvard, but it was definitely harder to explain in law school. Just like, well, I have a dance injury. It's kind of just causes pain in a lot of places. And I don't really know. Sometimes I'm tired, but probably because I'm in pain a lot. It's just like a little bit like amorphous. And so
Mhm.
even now, being able to say, oh, I have a connective tissue disease, I have an autoimmune disease, people don't necessarily know what that means. But they know, like, oh, that's a big
That's
thing.
the
Like,
thing. Yeah.
you have medical, like large medical issues that you might need accommodations for. So I think that is definitely easier. I think also I got diagnosed with ADHD like a year ago. It
Wow.
explains so much. But but I didn't know, because people would say, oh, well, you can't actually have ADHD. You went to Princeton or Harvard Law School. You obviously didn't struggle in school. Right. And I think that is something that I've always had to deal with. It's like I have all these health issues, yes, and they are limiting, and there are days when I don't feel good. But most people just see, like, okay, but you're running a really successful business. You went to Princeton or Harvard Law School. Like, you can't be suffering that much. And so I think there's
Mhm.
definitely a tension there. I guess I sort of compartmentalize. I talk to my therapist about the fact that, like, I think sometimes I separate like myself and my body,
Mhm.
which is not the healthiest of things. But I think it's kind of the way that I just sort of push through. And I mean, there are days when it's harder too, and days when I'm in a lot of pain. And sometimes that's also hard because I have a really high pain tolerance at this point.
Mhm.
So actually, even things like my hip surgery, like I saw the surgeon and he was like, most people would have been in here like 4 years ago. You saying you
Mhm.
can't sit? You haven't been able to sit without pain for like 4 or 5 years. And I was like,
Wow.
yeah, I just, you know,
We adapt.
kind of, yeah, I just adapted. And
Mhm.
I guess sometimes that does like probably not make it easy for my doctors. But I think that, I don't think that anyone is should compare how they deal with mental health
Mm.
or I mean, I also deal with like depression and anxiety, but I don't think that anyone should compare how they're dealing with it to someone else. I think sometimes it can get easy to say, and I wouldn't want anyone to look at this and be like, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just push through like Sydney? Or, why can't I, she has this, but she's still doing that. And I think that we all have our own path,
Yes.
and we all have our own seasons and time.
Mhm.
I think for me, a lot of this happened in still pretty formative ages, right? Like 21 through 24 was basically characterized by me trying to figure out what was going on with my health and also try to be a young adult. And I
This is
was
already a
in
lot.
these, right, right. And so I was like in these situations where like I think my sense of self was formed a little bit with
Mm.
with it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is hard. I wouldn't tell anyone that it isn't hard. And I'm very open about it. I'm very open about sharing it with my students and social media and that sort of stuff, because I think it's important that people don't like say, oh, Sydney's life is perfect. Like, my life is not perfect at all. And I don't have everything together, like, at all. So I would never want anyone to like think that.
But I think that it's so valuable, what you said about not comparing, your journey with someone else's, because that is definitely going to cause, some inequities in your thinking.
Hmm.
And it's just the fact that everybody experiences their journey differently. We can have the exact same diagnosis and experience it completely differently,
Hmm.
and that's okay. But the thing is to be true to yourself, to
Hmm.
listen to your body. And what I admire so much about your story is that you did not give up. You did not stop doing what you needed to do, um, in terms of your academics, but also in terms of, treating your issues, treating your symptoms, and working towards a diagnosis with your, medical team. I just think that that is so admirable because so many people get frustrated or don't want to know what it is or don't want to deal with that diagnosis issue. And when you say to me, because I can name this diagnosis, it gets easier to manage it. It's easier to explain it to other people. And I think that that is such a powerful point to focus on for a minute, because sometimes people want to be in denial.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a very natural part of it, because I'm sure that when you first started to have symptoms, you just kept going like, okay, it'll pass. That's what most
Yeah.
of us do, right?
And I think because mine started as an injury, it wasn't
Mhm.
ever something that I could just say, "Oh, it doesn't," like, it's like, "No, there's something wrong here and we need
Mhm.
to fix it." I think that I've been very aggressive, I will say that. I
Yeah,
mean, it's been very expensive, I won't lie to you, but I
absolutely.
have been very aggressive in seeking out the right doctors, the right medical team. Like, I don't accept, like, "You just don't know." Like, "Okay, you don't know? Great. We're gonna find someone who
Somebody
does
else
know."
does. Yes, absolutely. And I definitely advocate for that mindset because it's worth it. It's
Mhm.
worth it to know what you're up against. That way you can find a plan and address the
Yeah.
things that are going on with you so that you can reach the goals that you've set for yourself.
Right. I mean, my thing is I'm 27. I would love by the time I'm 30 to have some solid diagnoses, solid treatment plans, and like get
Mhm.
into a rhythm. But I think like I just have too much life to live to just kind of accept that it's just gonna be this way forever. And
Absolutely.
like I definitely have had some doctors be like, "Oh, you might just be dealing with this." And it's just like, well, I don't know. Like maybe we can accept that like 10 years from now, but right now I feel like we could try harder.
Absolutely. And I love that you said by age 30, realizing that it doesn't happen overnight. And I want anyone who is watching this, who is in the process of being diagnosed, to realize that sometimes it does not happen overnight. But don't quit. Don't give
Yeah.
up and don't stop trying to learn as much as you can and educate yourself as well as you can about what's happening with your body.
Right. And I recognize that I'm in a privileged position. I definitely recognize my privilege because some of my doctors are on concierge plans, some of my doctors are out of network, some don't accept insurance. And so, and I pay for it myself. My parents can't afford to help me pay for it, but I am very grateful that I'm in a position. Before I was in a position, I just charged a lot of stuff to my credit card,
Mhm.
which I did pay off last year. But like I just believe that sometimes it's frustrating because I'm like, the more money I make, the
Mhm.
more my medical bills like increase, and I'm like, why? Why can we never be ahead? Why are we always in the same spot? But I try to look at it as like, well, God knew my medical bills would increase, so He increased my income. Just I
There
wish
you
just
go.
was more of it went to me and not medical. But one day,
One day. But that's such a healthy way to look at it. I do want to go back to something else that you said because I think it's so, so important. And you talked about the fact that you are in therapy. And I
Mhm.
just love that you shared that because so many people, there's such a taboo on that and a stigma on that, especially in our community, that people are resistant to therapy. Um, and I just think that it's so important to realize that that is an option
Oh
and a
yeah.
reasonable option. Can you tell me just a little bit about how important it is to manage your emotional health, especially in light of chronic illness and all the other
It's
things?
the most important thing. I mean, I've been in therapy since I was 15.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of one of those radical people that just believes that like everyone should be in therapy, just like literally like every single person. I think even if you're like, I'm good, like maybe you're at an A, you could be at an A plus though. With some like, I mean, therapy helps you get towards self-actualization. It helps you become more self-aware. It helps you with interpersonal relationships. It really helps you become honestly a better person, a more whole person. And I feel like we don't treat mental health as we treat our physical health, but
Mm,
doctors will say this, right? Everyone will say this, not to diminish it. And sometimes I didn't like it when I first heard it, but your stress and your mental health do affect your pain. right?
Absolutely.
It affects your sleeping. It affects your blood pressure. It affects your heart rate. It affects everything. They're kind of interconnected. I do a lot of acupuncture too, right? So it's all kind of like connected, and I've been trying to meditate more, although I'm not really good at consistency. I'm working on it. But I there are there are so many moments where you do have low moments. Like I've had really low lows, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm pretty good. My depression is pretty managed, but like I do have a history of like suicidal ideation, right? And
Mhm.
so and that's actually way more common than like we don't talk about
Mhm.
it. But I think that there are times when I'm like I don't want to deal with this
Yeah.
anymore. I don't want to be strong. I don't want to keep fighting. I just don't want to do it anymore.
Mhm.
um and it's okay to have those moments. I think that my boyfriend and I, we've been dating for a while, and we're at the place where he's like finally seen some of those moments, and he's learning. He has his own therapy too. I think it's also important for those that are helping um
Mhm.
to also be in therapy. I mean, he's also just in therapy because again, it's a good thing to have. But learning how to best be supportive, and also recognizing that there's an emotional toll from being in a relationship with someone who has these
Absolutely.
chronic illnesses. But I think that I consider my therapy like maintenance, right?
Mhm.
Like I go regularly, and some weeks it's like, yeah, I'm great, we're great. Like let's just talk about life. But I think when you have chronic illness and you have chronic pain, or maybe at least the way mine is, you can be good and then like you can just be not good like randomly, like I had a pain in the back of my head for like 3 months that just like started randomly one day, right?
Mhm.
And so I feel like because of that random nature of how pain is, it's not something where I'm like, oh, I'm only going to have therapy while I'm having an episode, right? Because that would
Mhm.
just always be stopping, starting, and that would just be really inconsistent. So I'd rather just like always have therapy. And then when the random things happen, I have already a support system,
Yeah.
someone who I can talk to about it. I'm not trying to get help after the crisis has happened. I'm like having help from the beginning all the way through the end. And so I can manage the crisis better. So for me, I feel like if you're dealing with chronic illness, especially if there's any kind of unpredictability in it, it's just really good to have some predictable support systems.
I really appreciate you sharing that because I think that for a lot of Christians, there's this hesitation. We don't want to admit, that we have low lows. You know, I think that a lot of Christians watching this might have been very surprised when you acknowledge that you've experienced suicidal ideations because we're not supposed to, right? But the reality is that when you're looking at a chronic diagnosis and you realize that you're going to wake up every day with symptoms and you may not know what they're going to be or how they're going to impact you or how they're going to impact your schedule, and it's hard to plan things and it's hard to make promises and know that you're going to follow through, and all these things come up, it can be very, very draining, and it can weigh on you emotionally and mentally. And so just what you're saying, that yes, it's totally natural to feel those ways, but that there are things that we can do to address them, that we don't have to stay there. And
Yeah,
so
and I mean,
I appreciate you sharing that. Go ahead, please.
of course. I mean, I'm very religious. People say like spiritual now, but like I'm a Southern Baptist.
Okay.
Um, I'm actually planning on going to seminary next year.
Awesome.
Like faith is very important to me. And also I struggle with depression and those thoughts. And my therapist is Christian, right? It was important to me. She's a Black woman.
Mhm.
Shout out to her. She's phenomenal. She also has fibromyalgia and chronic
Oh.
autoimmune. So it was really good connection. But I feel like you can meditate and pray, right?
Mhm.
You can go to therapy and pray. I think that God has given us support tools, and having, if that's something that you struggle with this concept of therapy with your face, I would encourage you to seek out a Christian counselor, someone who can remind you, well, what does God say about, that? Or have you prayed about that lately? Because sometimes I'm not going to lie to you here. I'm going to be real 100. Um, I went through a period about 2 weeks ago where I had trouble praying. I was just so angry and so sad and so just I was just like, I don't even know. Like I didn't even have like good prayers. I was just like crying. And I talked to my therapist about it. I was like, I tried to pray. I just cried instead. I don't think that counts. and, and I mean, she's not my pastor or anything. I do have a pastor and spiritual guide, but it's just good sometimes for us to realize that one, things like depression and anxiety, more so depression, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain, right? So it is like literally a mental health issue.
Mhm.
It's you cannot, just like I cannot pray away, although you can pray on your physical health and God does heal miraculously.
Absolutely.
Um, but it's something that you still should seek the help with a mental provider on. But I will be honest and say that I'm still working on my faith in the area of healing. I have big faith for a lot of things God has done above and beyond, especially with my business. I mean, the the fast-paced nature of my business, right? Like I went full time in April, but really we'll call it June. I made, you know, over $100,000 in that 6-month period. I was able to write a lot of pieces on systemic racism in education. I was named the 2020 Making a Difference Award in the Professional Association, and the 2021 Counselor of the Year this year. Like all of that is literally only God, because that was not in the little plan that I wrote my parents. So I can see that I have big faith for certain things. I feel like if you say, do you have faith that God's going to bless your business? Absolutely. Do you have faith that you're going to touch people's lives with this? Absolutely. Do you have faith that you're going to be healed? Yes.
Mm.
um, yeah, I have absolute faith that God can heal me.
Mhm.
I think I'm struggling with the timeline, if you want to be honest. There's a lot of conflicting theology, right? There's some theology that says, God, would have never given you this. Like he doesn't give us illness for certain things. And then, for a while I was saying, well, I don't think I would have been a consultant full time. I wouldn't have taken the leap if not for this mental, like if not for the physical illness, right?
Right.
If not for all these things, I probably would still be at a firm. But but then am I saying that God let this happen, or maybe he just used it? Yeah, there's so many different ways to look at it, and I don't really know how to look at it. I know that he can heal me. That's the part that I have faith in. And I struggled a little bit with feeling like, well, maybe God's not healing me because I'm not exercising like the doctor told me to exercise. And maybe God is like, I just told you what to do and you're not doing it. But then I learned that that was also probably not healthy thinking. So I'm working on it, right? Like I'm trying to read my Bible. I'm trying to figure out the woman with the issue of blood is like a thing that I read a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and it's okay that you don't have perfect faith in every area also.
Yeah.
Like that's fine.
We are all works in progress, and so I don't think any of us has arrived, at that place in our faith where we don't have any doubts
Mm.
or any questions or anything that we hesitate. I think that we all have those things. But I just feel like where you are, you're on such a healthy journey, to that place of faith. um, I think it's important to look at different people in the Bible and realize that even when Jesus was doing his earthly ministry, he healed people in different ways,
Mhm.
you know. And so what he does for one person may not be the way that he does for us. And even though
Mhm.
he does allow us to have these illnesses, he's got a plan for everything he allows, you know.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that he promises to work it all together for our good. So whatever that looks like in your situation, it may look totally different. Work together for good might look
Right.
different for me than it does for you. And it's okay to go to God with those questions. And crying absolutely counts as prayer. It absolutely counts because God understands. He speaks
Yeah.
that language, you know. And so I just think that it's important that even though you maybe didn't have the words to say, you still went to him with your tears.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
gives him that audience. It gives him that opportunity to speak to you even through the tears. And I think that it's okay not always to have it all together.
Yeah.
and not to put the pressure on ourselves to always have it together, because it's just not realistic. And here's what I love to say about it is that God knew before he made me what my body situation would be like today. And he still wanted me. And he still thought that I was good enough to create. And so if he loved me the way that he knew I would be, then I can love myself this way. And I can be okay with the fact that my body doesn't work like somebody else's, but God knew where I would be, and he knows how to take care of me, and he knows how to get me to where he wants me to go. And so I just pray that that you and that others will be encouraged and continually encouraged, to just keep going forward, keep pressing in, and just keep seeking him the way that you're doing is such an amazing thing that you are sharing with people. And I just appreciate you. Will you share just one more thing with us? And that
Of
is,
course.
when you are having those moments, or when you are dealing with the struggle and it's 100% real, what Bible verse encourages you?
I really, really love Philippians 4:6.
Mm,
Um, you know, be anxious in nothing, but in everything, go to God with prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, and He will, hear your needs. I think the be anxious in nothing part, whether it's I am feeling like I have bills and I don't have enough money,
mm,
um, that frequently happens. Or whether I'm feeling like I just, I don't know what to do with the health, or honestly, even when I'm in those really low moments, um, I just try to remember like all that God has done for me, and just like remind myself that, and remind myself how far He's brought me, and sometimes even remind myself of the last time I was in a low place. And like I was like, last time you felt like this, you thought it like everything was bad, but then like, do you remember like 2 months later everything was great?
yeah,
And so when I get in those moments, I just have to remember like 2 months from now everything could feel really different.
absolutely.
And just to like, just to try to not fixate just on the moment, and how hard it is and how painful it is. I mean, for me, it like is a physical like pain when I get that sad.
Mhm.
But to just, focus on the fact that like there is a morning, there is a joy. There's one of my favorite worship songs says, I have a feeling that darkness won't last very long, right?
Mhm.
And it's just so, important that that refrain, that joy comes in the morning. Like there is a morning. It might not be like 2 weeks from now, but
Yeah.
like there is a morning, and it does get better. And that my pastor said that all of your trials, they're just testimonies, right? They're just faith building blocks. And so, you know I can speak about how good God has been to me even with all of the trials that I've had, and someone can come to Christ. And that, that is a gift, really. So I just try to focus on that.
That's awesome. Such good words of wisdom. And I just appreciate your time today. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you?
Absolutely. So if you're looking to connect with my business, smontgomeryconsulting.com. Instagram is at smontgomeryconsulting. There's also a YouTube channel. But if you just want to, I say should just, but if you want to connect more with me personally, you can go to sydneyamontgomery.com. Instagram is @_ Sydney A. Montgomery. And I talk about things like faith. I walk you through my seminary prep. I talk to you about, anti-racism work and dismantling oppression, but also about other things like this, like chronic faith and wellness and self-care, and, believing in yourself.
Awesome. One last question. I'm sorry, I said one last question before, but
It's okay.
one last question. For somebody who is having a really low day and they're just not getting things done,
Mhm.
what is the self-talk? What do you say to encourage yourself in that moment?
I have started to realize One of my business coaches, she always says, everything is optional. And I'm like,
Mm.
no, no, Melissa, it's not optional. I have to get this done and this done and this done. And she's like, you don't have to. And I would say that everything is optional, right? Like we would like to get some things done today, but what is actually the worst thing that's going to happen? And I find myself with this as a business owner all the time. Like, oh, I have to get this email out because I say I'm going to send emails out on Tuesdays. What's going to happen if you don't? Nothing. Nothing. They're not going to say nothing to you. What happens if you don't send it for 2 weeks? Nothing. That you'll just send it when you're ready, right? Like what happens if the laundry doesn't get done? Listen, okay, I did laundry for the first time in 2021 in March. All right. It just be like that sometimes. And I wore other things and it was fine. Like there are all these shoulds that we have. I'm guilty of it. I'm like the queen of shoulds and to-do lists. But if you're really not feeling it, like maybe your body needs to really not feel it. Like maybe you just need to do nothing. And it's gonna be all right. The sun will still rise tomorrow morning and things will be fine.
Awesome. Powerful words, good advice. Thank you so, so much for being with us. I pray that this has been a blessing to those of you watching. And I love you. I'm praying for you. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for being with us.
Bye.